Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we are starting now the museum session, and a few short words, because all of our presentations in the museums have one in common. They are on a top level of discussion, of course, and yeah, surely, yeah. Yes. And I think there in the field of museums we have two developments and two important keywords dealing with issues of migration and diversity and intercultural dialogue. So we now have a multi-perspective approach and an active involvement of people. So this is true for all the papers. And for active involvement of people, I would ask you to come to the first rows, because we have such a gap here, and we try to be more engaged, all of us. So please join us in the first rows. So we try to close the gap a bit.
Not too close.
Can somebody pass me my sweater, please? Sit there.
So it's a bit better. It's a long way to have this process of active involvement, but we try our best now. We all have 15 minutes, and we'll have a discussion at the end of the section. And so I'm looking forward to your questions, of course. Let me introduce you Freya Bursting. She works, as you know, at the Danish Immigration Museum. And she's a curator, and she works a lot at the field of audience development and involvement. And this is her presentation about audience involvement of the Danish Immigration Museum. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah, you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you, Dietmar. And there's not much time, so I'll get right to it. And if this sounds like a long ramble, or if it seems a little bit like it's a work in progress, it's because it is. The Danish Immigration Museum opened in 2012. We have a large permanent exhibit, and we have a large special exhibit area and other little spaces where we make small exhibits. And ever since the opening, we have worked actively to engage the public in the museum's everyday work. We have asked migrants to come and tell their stories, to help us collect artifacts, and so on and so forth. We thought we were doing really good at engaging the public, but we sort of we had a lot of happy visitors, and they all told us that they were happy to contribute, and they thought that we were giving them a nice space. But we realized that we could do a lot better than that. And how we realized that was that we saw that what we did at the museum dissemination-wise was completely on our terms, the curators, and that even the personal stories that we gathered ended up not being very personal after we mediated them into exhibits. And we also experienced that even though we were open to contributions, our dissemination to the audience was much more of a receptive kind than of a participatory kind. A big part of our dissemination was still very much rooted in what you see here as spectating, enhanced engagement, and crowdsourcing. We came up with most of the ideas, and then we would approach the public to collect artifacts and only ask for the things that we thought that we needed for our exhibits and for the rest of our dissemination. And we really wanted to change that and make the museum more open and more engaging and less of us, and to make sure that the migrant stories were not necessarily told through us. So we started by making the participatory aspect the #1 goal in our latest 4-year plan. All state museums in Denmark work by a 4-year plan. Our board, the museum board, took a vow that they would support us in these endeavors, no matter how long it would take, because we suspected that it would take quite a long time. And then we wrote down 2 radical thoughts, or at least radical compared to sort of classical museum thinking. And we wanted to use those as guidelines to kickstart the process. One was the museum is not ours, and the other one is we don't know how to tell the story. And we started with that, it's sort of starting from scratch. And the perfect place to start to shake things up was where we felt most comfortable, and that was in the work that we were doing with school children. We have a learning department that hosts approximately 170 tours and school activities a year, or 170 groups. It has a variety of activities for different age groups. So what we did was we set up a learning program for 4th to 6th graders called Your Exhibition. And it tied in with the Danish public school learning schedule, where children have to develop skills that make them more innovative. And the program at the museum starts with an introduction to what a curator's job is. And then the children are presented with the task to think of and plan out a museum exhibit exactly like they would want it if they were in charge. And the children spend a day at the museum. They map out the special exhibits area, and they think of themes, and they discuss things with their classmates. And then they go back to their schools to work on the project. They come back a week later and they present the ideas to us. And some of these ideas are not completely possible practically. Some 5th graders suggested that we filled the whole space with water and little boats to show how it was to cross the Mediterranean as a refugee. And even though it was not a bad idea, due to building codes and security and things like that, we couldn't really do that. As you can see, some of them come back with like models of what they would want for the museum space. What we have there is a 4D cinema with water in it also. A lot of them like water. Let's see. But many of these ideas we could transfer directly into exhibits. Like the idea that the 2 boys on the left there came up with. They really like soccer, and they gave us the idea to make an exhibit about immigrant soccer players. And everything they came up with was directly transferable to an exhibit, and we ended up making it exactly like they had suggested to us, with like grass all over the floor and a soccer goal, and we had electronic football games and things like that. This program gives us an invaluable look into the brains of these young children. And all the ideas they give us, we keep in an idea bank that we sort of tap into whenever we make new exhibits. And an added bonus is that it gives, they take it very, very seriously. When they come back and present the projects to us, they're like little adults making elevator speeches and things like that. And they really take it very, very seriously. And it sort of rubs off on their families and their friends, who will then also visit the museum later. The second thing we did was to focus on our smaller exhibits. We changed our habits a bit. Our visitors came with even the smallest suggestions. We would make sure to inform them that if they had ideas for exhibits, or if they wanted to participate, they were more than welcome to come and talk to us. We spoke to a group of Turkish women who really wanted to sort of present their food culture. And what we did was that we gave them an exhibit space and let them tell their story completely unmediated by us. We only helped them when they asked, and we didn't interfere, and we simply made sure that they had access to the museum whenever they needed it, even at night, and that they had practical help, but the rest was up to them. And the result was a small but very personal exhibit. And a good example of what this sort of stepping back gave us was that one of these Turkish women had a grinding stone that she used to make flour on, that she brought from Turkey to Denmark. And this stone was very important to her and her family in Denmark, and for their identity as Turks. And she said, this stone has never left my house, but now this museum is also my place, so now I can bring it here. So that sort of shows that through this process, we have gained access to stories and objects that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. A Copenhagen-based Libyan street artist called Ayman Ayhani, this is the guy here. He contacted us and said that he really wanted to tell his life story in the museum. And we said great, and asked him how. And since he is a street artist, all he really needed was a wall. So we gave him that, and again we stepped back, and he took care of the whole process, from making this mural of his life story to handling the press to disseminating these stories to school children. And this new audience as curator approach worked so well that we decided to move it into our larger exhibit, special exhibits area. And from the small steps that we took in the beginning, we noticed that the word spread that the museum was now open for people to come and give their own input and take over this curator role. And suddenly many people contacted us with exhibit projects that they wanted to do. For example, Mark and Marcia there, he's Australian and she's from Poland. They wanted to do an exhibit on students at a local language school, a local Danish language school. And they interviewed the students and they did research on these language schools, and they also photographed the students. And it ended up being a really great exhibit on contemporary immigration to Denmark. And over the course of 4 months that this project lasted, we only had 2 meetings, Mark and Marcia. They took care of the rest of it, and it sort of shows that if you let people do their thing, really great things can happen. The same thing happened with an Italian woman called Inanna. She works with Danish asylum centers, and she contacted us along with a group of refugees from Somalia and Eritrea and Syria because they wanted to make an exhibit about their lives in their home countries and their escape to Denmark and their lives in Denmark as they were now. And once we had decided on an opening date, the project sort of completely unfolded without our interference. Some of you will probably know that if you work with the current refugee situation or any situation where you want to interview people, there's a huge difference between the questions you have on your piece of paper and what people actually want to talk about. But this process cut out that list of questions, and each refugee had a completely safe space to talk about what they wanted to talk about, if it was the trip across the Mediterranean or the food they missed from home or whatever it was. Also, the look of the exhibit ended up being different than what a classical museum exhibit would be. You can see it here. And much more personal, and through these personal aspects, it ended up being much more informative than anything us curators could ever have done. What we hear our audience curators say is that they feel more open and more comfortable being able to tell their stories themselves. That they like having control of everything, from which photos are being used of them to what kind of beverages we serve at the exhibit openings. Throughout this long process of moving from classical museum dissemination to this audience as a curator dissemination, we've asked ourselves many questions like which type of interaction will be relevant for the museum, and which criteria should the co-creation and the curating meet, and how should all these results be tied in with our permanent exhibits, all these things. But the answer to all these questions is quite simple, because it doesn't really matter so much. As I started out saying, the museum is no longer ours, and it's what our visitors deem relevant that will be relevant. You could say that we have our permanent exhibit, which is a little bit more conservative or traditional than some of the things these curators do. And that it functions as sort of a safety net for us if everything else becomes a little bit too colorful. But I'm sure that we could actually live without the safety net, because we've experienced that the work of these people is very professional and very diverse, and relevant not only to the groups that they represent, but also to the rest of the visitors at the museum. Of course, we do have to comply with the rules of museum law of the Danish Cultural Ministry, and we still make exhibitions without the involvement of the audience, and we do research, and we write papers, and we collect artifacts. But at the same time, we're no longer scared to just hand out the keys to the museum to someone who might have a different story to tell or a different way to tell it, and then just take a step back and give them the liberty of disseminating it. Moving forward, we want to open up the museum even more. We'll make our reception area available to anybody who has any events that has to do with migration. It could be if they put out a book, or if they have a concert or something related to us. Or like if it could be language groups, anything during the night. And these will all be things that we will not monitor. It will just be things that people will take care of themselves, and we will only provide the space. And the long-term goal of this is to ensure an availability of the museum, for example, through expanded opening hours. Many libraries in Denmark are now open 24 hours a day, and you can use your social security card to get in at night and sit and read or take out books. And that is something that we will be exploring in relations to our museum as well, to make sure that everybody has the access that they want to this cultural history. You may say that it sounds like we've completely let go of the reins, and that is correct, but to us it doesn't mean a decrease in quality. On the contrary. It has been hard, and still is for us curators, to let go and to not always be in control of both the planning and the collecting and the disseminating, because it challenges how we see ourselves and our roles in the museum. And of course, we don't want to lose our jobs. So, but it really does pay off. Not only do we feel that we have a much better dissemination, we have better exhibits and events, but we also feel a much stronger connection to the people whose stories the museum tells. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Freya, for this inspiring speech. And now the second is Michalina Petalska. Okay. Sure, as you know, she comes from the Emigration Museum in Gdynia in Poland. And she is working there she's responsible for coordinating international projects at the museum's research department. And now she gives us her paper about the cooperation between Emigration Museum in Gdynia and Polish diaspora, with the title Polish Identity on the Other Side of the Planet. So we are looking forward to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy that I can be here today with you. As we already talked during the break, we feel on the AMI conference like a one big family, so thank you for the atmosphere. And I really hope that one day, 1 year, I will be able to host you in Gdynia also. As our conference main idea this year is cultural identity of diaspora, of people living abroad from one nation, I would like to share with you today with our experience in our museum of projects we do to protect, commemorate, but also to strengthen the Polish identity abroad. I mean, the identity of local small communities. The projects I will show you, it will be examples of 4 projects. They have one thing in common. They are not our ideas. They are not our ideas, okay, what 2 projects we can do, maybe that. No, it was like our answer to the real need of some small local community somewhere in the world. First of a project I would like to show you is about Polish New Zealanders. I think it's really far away from Poland. And it can be surprising, but in New Zealand there is a really strong Polish community. They are coming from 3 waves of immigration, settlers from 19th century, then during the Second World War, and then immigrants from Solidarity Movement period, so it's 80s of 20th century. Now I would like to concentrate on that story of 733 Pahatuas Polish children. On the map you can see how they find their way to New Zealand, to a small camp in Pahiatua. During the Second World War, Poland was divided and governed by 2 countries, by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union organized deportations to the Far East or Kazakhstan. Their people were slave laborers. A lot of Polish people died there from hunger and from very strong, very hard work. Then in the middle of the war, there was taken a decision to form the Polish army after the Nazi attack on Soviet Union, and the Polish army in the Soviet Union was to fight the Germans alongside the Red Army. And that way the Polish people were granted an amnesty. The army was formed, and with the army also a lot of civilians, also a lot of orphans were evacuated from Far East, from the Soviet Union. And on the map you can see how some of them find their way to Africa, India or Australia, or also to New Zealand. And that now a few pictures showing the whole way. See, they were small teenagers also, and they were located in the camp in Pahiatua. It was former military camp. Now it served as a new home for hundreds of Polish children. On that photo you can see that those children are example of really good assimilation to the New Zealand society. As rugby is not a typical Polish sport, it's mostly unknown in Poland, and they started to play it in that camp. Now they are really elderly people, but they are still named Polish children because it's very characteristic for them. And now they also want to visit us. Or maybe you can see 3 of them. Now this children looks like that. And they want to share their memories. They wrote a book and they were looking for somebody who can organize it. As you can see, the elderly people, they don't know Polish reality as they live in New Zealand. They don't have really strong connection with young people in Poland. And we decided to help them. Here you can see the cover of the book called in Poland Dwie Ojczyzny, that means two homelands, Poland and New Zealand. So there is a book, there's an educational project. We are giving this book to young people from all over Poland, to schools. There will be an educational competition for young people from Polish schools. So we are giving the access to that story from New Zealand in Poland to Polish schools. And it was the idea which came to us from that people who are looking for help, who can, for somebody who can help to organize it for them. Sorry. Another example is a process of digitalization of very valuable archives. There is something like Polish Institute of Arts and Science of America, located in New York, in the USA. It was established during the Second World War, when in Poland it was impossible to work in an academic way at universities. A lot of Polish scientists died, were killed. Some of them find themselves on exile. And some of them established on exile in New York, Polish Institute of Arts and Science of America. They have real treasures in their archive, but this is a small or non-profit organization, and they simply don't have enough money on their own. They are just non-profit organization living from their own money, from their own voluntary work. They don't have money to organize the digitalization process. And the process of this digitalization of real treasure of Polish culture located there is possible thanks to Polish Ministry of Culture and National Heritage, and once again, the Emigration Museum in Gdynia. An example of the work is popularization, the collection of Andrzej Bobkowski, very important Polish writer. And once again, it was not our idea. The idea was born in during the visit of our museum staff in New York, and they were asked for help to organize such an event. Another project also connected with New York. There's a district, Greenpoint, it's a part of Brooklyn in New York. In some time in the 20th century, more than 30% of residents in Greenpoint have Polish roots. Nowadays, it's changing a little bit. It used to be a really Polish district with a lot of Polish restaurants, shops, I know, stores, and so on, with a lot of Polish name of business, of restaurants, of Polish shops on the street. It was easily can be seen, and also it was easy to feel it, that it was a Polish district. Now it's changing. Not so much Polish people living there. And once again, there was an idea to strengthen it, to show that to these people of Polish roots that living there, that they can be proud of it, that they can once again show it, their identity. This is the project of Culture Shock Foundation. This is Polish foundation, and they asked us to cooperate, as we have in our museum a very good department of oral history. And the part of that project is oral history project, collecting stories to commemorate it in our archives. We have the special website. You can find our oral stories collection on our website from all over the world to the internet, and listen to that stories also. So it was once again the idea of local people looking for somebody who can help to organize it. And another example also from the United States, Hamtramck. Hamtramck is a small town in USA. It also used to be a Polish town. It was a funny situation then. It was easier to use Polish language in the whole town than English, and some Americans started to use to learn Polish in some point in history to be able to live in their own city. Poles living there were workers connected with the Detroit industry. Now it's very small community of Polish people, elderly people. New migrants take the city. Now it's mostly Muslims society in that Hamtramck. And that project was made to commemorate and to collect some archives, some documents, and also to save it. Save the idea of that place. What was interesting in that project that it was taking place in both places. As you can see, the exhibition, workshops, presentations, lectures took place in Hamtramck in USA, and also at the same time in our museum in Gdynia in Poland. So, summing up, because I have 3 minutes, I want to show the projects of Polish diaspora. Sorry. I want to show projects of Polish diaspora ideas and our museum's support. we know how to organize some things. We also have when we can offer the help of our experts, and we are doing it to strengthen the Polish identity all over the world. Very important for us is this responding to local ideas. We want to be the home for the people. Here we can hear the example in the previous speech of giving a space for migrants coming to Denmark. We want to giving effective tools and modern ways of communication for Poles living abroad, for Poles living all over the world. And also we want to give some feeling for them that they are always very welcome when they in our museum, when they even don't have their own families, their own homes in Poland, because, for example, they are only have Polish roots and from 19th century, for example. We also have such kind of visits from Brazil, for example. Well, ending, I think that we are quite successful in that kind of projects, and I hope that we will organize it a lot more. Projects connected with cultural identities of Polish people from all over the world. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I think we should change places now.
Should I move that way?
Yeah. Come now if you want. Oh, jeez. Okay.
Present now or
You're presenting.
Later on.
just to be closer on the microphone?
You're right. Sure, go ahead.
Yes.
I'll be wanting to be here anyways. So.
Right. Okay.
Okay, the next one is Chris Cesis. He is from the Institute of Cultural Anthropology and Folklore Studies of the Hamburg University. He actually works on his thesis, I think, yeah. Cesis is working on his thesis. It's complicated for me.
Rhymes, yeah.
Okay, about the Greek guest workers, or so to say in Germany, Gastarbeiter, and he gives a presentation of a case study Greek Gastarbeiters in Germany towards collaborative museum works with immigration communities, and this is an analysis of the work of museums, I think. So I'm looking forward to your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dietmar. Is it that loud? No, it's okay. First of all, dear colleagues and participants of this IME conference, it's a major honor to be here. I have been knowing the IME as a name or as a reference when working on my master thesis already some 4 years ago at the Viadrina University in Frankfurt Oder, exactly on the German-Polish borders or the eastern window of Germany to Poland, let's say. And I was working at that time on my master thesis, theoretically and basically stuff on how the notion of migration landed more or less in the museological space in Europe and in Germany. So now for me being here in IME and presenting my ongoing PhD research is a great opportunity. I would like to thank you very much. So the title of my ongoing PhD research project I have started like 2 years ago at the University of Hamburg at the Institute of Cultural Anthropology. The title, Visual and Material Displays of Greek Migration Histories in Museums and Exhibitions in Germany. So I take as a case study, let's say an ethnographic case study. I'm doing an ethnography on the historical period of Greek guest labor workers in the so-called West Germany. And I'm looking at the first phase from the recruitment, which started like roughly 1955, but let's say from 60 to 73. And so the title is Towards Collaborative Museum Work Migration Community. Usually I try to give an overview of the aspects of my PhD project, but this time I consider more crucial to share with you my experience so far in the field, so what we called in anthropology or history, or where you have it, the field, and specifically where I have started my participant. Is it too? No. Okay. Okay. I will bang in your ear. Sorry. And yeah. So specifically, I've started my participant observation or fieldwork in Berlin, including a so-called ethnographic, let's say, experiment in a local museum in Berlin, Neukölln, with my so-called informants or the group of my case study. I will also highlight some parts of my archival research in Hamburg at it's called the FCH, the let's say Historical Archive of Public History, where I am grateful for having found a very rare archive of a Greek guest worker woman who was employed in Germany as a guest worker, and then she studied sociology. She became a sociologist, and she has an amazing archive. I hope I'll make it in time to show you some aspects. And, so yeah, usually, I mean, my structure goes like that, like highlight my problem statement, then a cluster of my research questions, the theoretical and the practical curatorial ones, then the methodology, why I use this methodology. And I'm not a trained anthropologist, so from I would really like to hear comments and observation and even critical feedback. And so yeah, part of my fieldwork and share my experience, and maybe to have an epi session of with the aim of my study. So really briefly, the problem statement in a yet delayed historiography or in the museum landscape, migration history has landed in the German museum scene, but yet immigrants' participation in exhibition projects, it's hardly any, or there is no participation of and collaboration with the protagonists of the stories being displayed. So despite the topic's increasing presence in the German museological scene, still the active involvement, engagement of the real actors in all aspects of exhibition planning, collection, decision-making, and curating is not sufficient and basically absent. In the same line of argumentation, sociopolitical or economical dimensions of labor migration, who define the very much project, are often omitted, or let's say sometimes hidden or masked under aspects of classical enactment of, let's say, of multicultural, to quote Joachim Bauer, or stereotypical ornamentation and design, which reinforces national narratives, perhaps, and representational strategies such as methodological nationalism. This is roughly, I mean, these two pictures that I have from the Bremenhaven Museum I visited last year with, on the context of a seminar I did in Hamburg, again on this topic, museum and migration. I just mentioned this, the suitcase syndrome, more or less, which is like a sort of becoming a syndrome in these very much exhibitions. And well, it's not all the museum about that. It has some problematic aspects, some really good aspects. I'm highlighting this suitcase syndrome. And so, yeah, my research question, as I said, is again on the representational scope, informed by the whole crisis of representation from the anthropological discourse, like who gets to, from which side are the stories being told, who is using what and for which purpose. And I also strive to focus on the curatorial practice upon such exhibitions. So is there a sufficient and significant involvement of immigrant or activities in related exhibition projects? How the ecology of paradigms of collaborative exhibition projects, for example, the participatory museum from Nina Simone, can be applied to this case studies about participation, collaboration with so-called migration communities or source or heritage communities. This is, I mean, the participative collaborative museum, like the concept from Nina Simone. Maybe we have time at the end to discuss it and how it can be materialized and implicated. So, and again, some other further question, how can eventually migration history is always in plural, eventually can be displayed in contemporary European museum and heritage institutions. Furthermore, some aspects we have to do with the so-called Greek national identity, how it is constructed, and notions of homeland and belonging, and more or less of diasporic memory. I mean, which were the prevailing images or archetypes of subjects or actors of Greek post-war labor migration. And it would be challenging to observe how these representational images and figures interact and coincide with the mentality attitudes of the new generation of Greek migration in Germany because of this prolonged financial or this prolonged extracted financial debt crisis. Additionally, what objects and practices do migrants value and carry them with them in their movements? Which object will people choose to donate or lend for a potential exhibition project on this topic, and will they personally participate in such an effort? And generally, how can the cultural heritage of the so-called post-migration society, it's a concept that in Germany and other countries, a lot of migration and historians work a lot on that, on this post that we talk not only about migration societies and models of assimilation or culture, but the post-migration society, not in a post-structural sense, but in a sense that, you know, these are citizens of this given host country. So it's on another transitory level. And so how this cultural heritage of this post-migration society can be defined in terms should one preserve and present it. So my theory, more or less, is informed by the critical heritage studies, new critical museology, the crisis of representation, and the notion of museum as social forum. We really like to discuss that with my colleagues here because there are a lot of interesting projects going on in museums, or also the notion of post-museum by Stuart Hall and Elian Greenhill. So it's, very briefly, it's a hermeneutic critical analysis of visual materials. So I'm trying to look at documentaries, films and newsreels, depicting images and motifs of the Greek labor migrant. And also I'm applying, because like really diving to ethnographic methods, this multi-sided focused ethnography, so archival research, ethnographic fieldwork, and biographical interviews. My part of, as I said in the beginning, I have started in Berlin, my participant observation in Berlin, and I'm acting in archival research in Hamburg, where I collect archival material and related information from historical archives, and also the Museum de Arbeit as a result of a steady collaboration with two curators of the museum. My plan is to go to Munich if I manage to have some sort of a research stay there, and to speak with various networks, again, of migrators of political memory and heritage. And briefly, because I don't think I will make it time-wise, my fieldwork at το σπίτι. So I started my participant observation there at roughly June 2014 at this immigration intercultural center, which is called το σπίτι, the home, the house, domus, in Berlin, Neukölln, one of the most multicultural areas in Berlin, amounting to 130, I think, ethnic communities in Germany. And it's a project funded by the Evangelical Church, the Diakoniewerkstatt. So it's an intercultural social center for people with migration background, initiated in West Berlin in '73. The tasks generally more or less were social work, consultations in issues concerning social and health insurance, housing, educational programs, and language learning for most of this generation of Greek labor workers who face difficulties in learning the language due to heavy industrial work, the working housing conditions, and so on. So in the context of weekly meetings, let's say they have this Senioren Cafe, it's called the Cafe of the Seniors. In Berlin, Neukölln, I had the chance to meet every Wednesday morning the men and women from this first generation of Greek guest workers, where they meet, socialize, and participate in various activities of the center. It is conceived more or less as a socialization space, where this group of seniors get together and frequently over a cup of coffee discuss with their peers social, political issues, medical issues, their daily reality, and so on. In the beginning, it was a sort of a chaotic and complex experience, as it is always in the field. Many seniors, I thought I was a new social worker or an intern, often a journalist, but generally the reception was very warm. The setting was really striking in the beginning. All women sitting on the left and all men at the right, like reminding an old kafenion perhaps in the Greek periphery, although in these places still women were always never allowed as a custom. from already the Ottoman Empire. So as time went by, a certain trust and relationship began to take shape. So apart from the cafe meetings, I followed the group in 2 Christmas celebrations, 2014 and 15, where I had the opportunity of making important informal talks with the seniors, and then some biographical interviews with them. The topics varied. I mean, you can see some really, many issues on gender, class, ethnicity, and social inequality. There are certain tropes and motifs with the interviews with the seniors. Okay, of course, about always nostalgia or homesickness, or Greece, or Hellas as an ideal or a utopian idea that these people would never manage to reach, as there have been so many years in Germany, but never fully integrated in the society. And this concept was really interesting, that I have heard in many interviews that rural life is the symbol of freedom. So these people had like eventually cultural or a shock moving to Germany from mostly rural places in Greece and poor rural places. The notion of temporality, and because I don't think I will make it time-wise, just some few snapshots from my sort of ethnographic experiment to the Neukölln Museum. So we went with the Senioren group there, and it was not a guided tour. It was just a museum visit with the Senioren group, with the new coordinator Sofia and the coordinator Nikki Reister here with the blue shirt. It was like the community expert, a really dynamic woman that people in the community, of course, really respect. But I wanted to observe, without guidance, how the seniors would function in the museum space, their reactions, their comments, their opinions regarding the central exhibition, but as well as the objects, how they respond to the object, the architecture. And one interesting thing that happened when Sofia was presenting her guide tour, more or less like informal guided tour, like this pretty much dynamic woman with a gray hair, she sort of interrupted her, I don't have the picture there, and say, okay, now I will tell you my story. As soon as he took this sign with some kitchen utensils that you see, and some signs of labor work, so kitchen utensils and labor work objects, and I saw that generally these objects, I mean, this is not a new finding, but this object really generate immediate storytelling, vivid narratives of memory or childhood life in the village. But they also reveal networks of relationship between people, places, and things. They act as mnemonic devices, and they immediately generate personal biographical stories, social practices, habits, life in the countryside, and so on. I also had, I'm done, or 2 minutes for the 1 minute, okay. I don't want to tire you. There was a very significant story with the Friedhof, like the Greek cemetery, which was story field emerging from one of the women and from the Tospiti. Again, a personal biographical story. One of these women fought and finally managed, after 13 years, to have a Greek part of the cemetery, this necrotaphion in Berlin, Tempelhof, where we see a striking visual iconography, motifs and references from ancient Greece, Byzantium, Hellenic nation-state flags, states, poems, some picture here, and we see also these things of issues of national identity, commemoration, memory, how these people would like to be remembered, but also notions of social stratification. There are the pictures with you see like some memorials, 3 or 4 memorials that they have not so much close distance with each other, and some others which belong to the social, I mean, to people who didn't have money to pay for that. And so you see this social stratification, like the wealthy and the poor. And I'm thinking always about the absence of state and church, which the informants told me about it, and the urgency and autonomy of migration, the right for citizenship, not only the right to live, but also the right to have a decent death. And I'm thinking about the Thanatos citizenship concept of Sarah Green, and thinking about the refugees in Lesbos, which apparently these are some 2 pictures that have been sent by some activist networks. I'm finished more or less. One last remark is that as I'm not employed in not employed. I'm not part of a museum project. I really want to I'm doing ethnography outside the museum, but within and for the museum. So I'm really eager to discuss these thematics of my ongoing research with also experts from the museological scene, and to see the possibilities and limitations and what can we do in terms of representing migration histories very inclusively and with a critical curatorial concept, not only in Germany, but in Europe, especially in this turbulent time, so-called, I think it's a crisis of European Union institutions, not a refugee crisis. Okay, thank you for your attention, and sorry for taking the time.
Okay, thank you for your speech. Now,
Again, mobility.
no, you can stay here. She's just. Now it's a turn of Antrat Salmina from the Latvians Abroad Museum and Research Center. Just F5, yeah. You can start. A genealogist and specialized on Latvian genealogy, and this is her talk about this as a method of restoration of identity and diaspora. And now I think the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes and next 2 minutes as only the others, and we are looking forward to your paper.
Hello. Okay, there we go. All right. Thank you, Dietmar. As you can see there, the title for my presentation is called Genealogy as a Method for the Restoration of Identity and Diaspora Homeland Ties After the Iron Curtain, the Latvian Example. Now, this sounds very academic, but really it's about one of the most basic of human emotions, and that's the need to belong and to feel at home in the world. And if you've been denied a part of your identity, this is not a very easy journey, and that's what I'll be talking about today. Is just a little bit about the historical context. Many of you might know about it already. Approximately 120,000 to 200,000, different places say different figures. Ines' presentation yesterday said 200,000, so there's a number of also of how many people left, but then also some people returned, and then more people emigrated. So that's probably where the different figures come in, is in those different ways. And then several years of displaced persons camps, people began to emigrate to Canada, the United States, Australia, the UK, Brazil, Argentina, also sometimes New Zealand, a couple of other places, but those are the main places that people emigrated to. And many Latvians participated in cultural activities in the diaspora communities, but many also didn't and assimilated to the local population. Now, when it comes to the genealogy, I've been doing my own genealogy business for the past 6 years. This is separate from the museum. I'll be getting into the connection to the museum at the end, but I've been doing my own genealogy business for about 6 to 7 years, and this is something that I have observed from the clients I've had, interviews I've done with people doing their own research, and this is what I have learned. The typical profile of someone looking to find out about their Latvian ancestry that I found is about 40 to 65 years old. Their parent left Latvia as a relatively young person between the ages of 18 and 25, often without any family, either because they were in the military or they were taken as laborer, or they just left and their family happened to be left behind. This child of theirs who's looking for their information speaks little to no Latvian because the family didn't pass any information on. That was just something that wasn't talked about. And so the children married outside of the Latvian community. Often they have children of their own now, and their Latvian parents are deceased. And now they want to know everything that they weren't told when they were growing up, because it's either too painful, or in some cases, you can find out all sorts of information that they probably didn't want you to know. But that was all part of the journey, and people want to know. And if you're disconnected from your history, you end up wanting to find that out. Now, the first steps in people researching their family history, I have this list right here. However, that's not a strict order. It can go in many different ways. They're flexible and shifting depending on how people are approaching their research. And I have this image of a tree here because, well, a tree sort of standing on its own, because when people frequently start their genealogical journey, they feel alone. They don't feel like there's anybody else out there looking for that information the way they are, but they find very quickly that they're actually part of a very large community looking for many of the same things. Overcoming the myths. One of the big myths when it comes to Latvian genealogical research is the fact that people think that there are no records because there have been so many wars that have gone through Latvian territory, the First World War, Second World War, various revolutions. But the fact is that there are so many records that survive. It even surprised me when I first started doing my own family research, but there's so much out there. Most of it's at the archives. Some of it's digitized, most of it isn't. But it is out there if people are willing to look for it. And that's one of the most common myths out there. There are other myths about commonality of surnames. People think that their surname, it sounds very exotic to them because they're not very exposed to the Latvian names, but then they discover that it's actually very common in Latvia, or the complete opposite, that it's not very common, and it might be very simple for them to find people that they're connected to in the country because their name is so rare. And then, of course, there are fears. Fears that they won't find anything, fears that of disproving family stories, of what little what little information they have been told, fear of finding out that that's completely wrong, which does sometimes happen. And also fear that if they do end up finding a relative in Latvia, that person won't accept them, that person won't want anything to do with them. And sometimes it happens that the people there have had fears that the family from the West is going to come back and take away everything that they have, take away the home, stake some sort of claim on that. People do have fears on that. So there have been fears on both sides. Also fears, I mean, less now that Latvia is part of the EU, but in the early years, there also used to be a fear in the diaspora community that the relatives in Latvia are going to try and exploit them to get to Canada, to get to America, wanting them to buy all sorts of fancy things. I mean, believing that everybody in the West is rich, which isn't always the case. So there are fears always on both sides. And so one of the first things that people do when they're doing this research is they're looking to find community. They'll type something like Latvian genealogy into Google, which typically brings you to one of two places. One is my website, and the other one is a Facebook group, which is about Latvian genealogy. I think it's got about 700 members at this point, and people are showing up on a regular basis, looking for information, looking to connect with people. Some people have managed to find relatives to that community. But the key thing with the community is that it can give support, but it can't always give direction. And that's the thing that me and there are a couple of other professional genealogists working in the field, there aren't many of us, we try to give direction, but sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. The saying, of course, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So sometimes we're successful in giving direction, sometimes we're not, but that's the nature of the business. And the key in terms of finding the right tools is, because that goes along with learning the skills, is that there's a very steep learning curve, especially if you have no familiarity with any of the languages involved. You don't need to be fluent in any of the languages, but to do your research, you need a basic understanding of some Latvian, some German, some Russian, including the various different alphabets that you need for those. And so the learning curve is quite steep, but there are methods to make it easier. And then finding the facts. That's always the most exciting part, is when you finally find that connection, you finally find your family member, whether it's your parent or your grandparent, in the records. You can see that, yes, I exist, that I have a history, my family is there. And sometimes you also find information that your parents never told you about, and I'll be sharing some stories in just a moment. And then, of course, there's making contact. And in some cases, some people are very brave with how they make contact. If it's a common surname, it's a bit harder, but in terms of uncommon surnames, people will often take the approach of just messaging everybody on Facebook who has that surname, or if they know where in Latvia that family was from, they'll show up there and just start asking around, is there anybody with this surname? And actually, it frequently works. So just a few quotes that I have from some people that I interviewed about the journey back, such as feelings about visiting Latvia for the first time here. I have a quote from someone who from New Zealand who then came to Latvia, and they said that I felt connected, like I had a real history. I felt I was home. It made me feel like I had to understand more, do more research, and do all I could to bring my family back to Latvia to live. And also regarding meeting relatives for the first time, you can see it there. It was an extraordinary experience meeting 3 living relatives of my mother's side of the family. Whilst we'd never had any previous contact with them and my Latvian was rusty, it did not matter. They embraced me and my husband as one of them, and their warmth and sincerity was an unforgettable experience. I'd say of the clients that I've worked with, approximately a quarter of them have made trips to Latvia, and many of them have ended up finding relatives in many different ways, as I'll get here. Here, gentleman here, his name's Marty, he's from Canada. When he decided he wanted to see if he could meet relatives, what he did was he contacted the local libraries. And as we all know, libraries, archives, museums are good places of memory. And so he contacted the library in the community that his father was from, and the librarian there, she was able to connect him with a number of his relatives, who you see there when he was visiting. And they're looking at the different documents that they've come across. Yeah. And here on the left there, that's Pauline. She's from the UK. She was one of my first clients. Her father hadn't told her anything about his life in Latvia. And we discovered through the research possibly why that could have been. It turned out that her grandmother was a Bolshevik revolutionary. And she'd been very active even before First World War, and then in Second World War when the communists had come in, both during the time of the 1941 census, which was after the Nazi occupation. Both she and Pauline's father were in prison during the time of that census, Soviets, and then she was later killed by the Nazis. And then her son left and moved to England and never talked about any of that. But she was very happy to learn more about her family. And when she went to Latvia, I'd given her a map with where her family farms were, and she actually drove right up to them, knocked on the door, and introduced herself. And here she is with some of her relatives that she's found outside one of the family farms there. And then last here, we have someone who's not the child of one of those, but the grandchild, also from the UK, a young woman by the name of Holly, who you can see up there with her newfound Latvian relatives. She took the approach of going to the cemeteries in the area her family was from, posting notices on the cemetery bulletin boards that she was looking for contact with her relatives. And even before they'd left Latvia, somebody called her up. And now she's got a whole bunch of family that she'd never known about before. So now how that comes into a role for museums, which is something that we are discussing at our institution right now. And I think this is a really important thing, obviously, for the museum to pursue, because the community being drawn in by genealogy is a community that is being ignored by the government and diaspora organizations, because this is the community, they don't speak Latvian, so they don't have access in the same way. But numbers-wise, I'm pretty sure that when you take them as well other waves of Latvian migration, they make up the largest percentage of the Latvian diaspora, and they can't be ignored. And I can't handle them all by myself, so that's why I really want the museum to participate in a much more active way. And being as a field of Latvian genealogy and roots tourism is just a field that's really starting out right now. It's a great opportunity for our organization to get in on the ground floor of that, to bring this part of the diaspora into the community and welcome them home, so to speak. So there's several different ways that the museum could be involved here. Keeping records regarding migrants. That can conflict with some institutions, but I know one way that it could possibly come in useful is, some of you might be aware of the International Tracing Service based in Germany that has a lot of records for displaced persons after the Second World War. I know that they have organizations in several different countries that have copies of those records. So this could be a role that we could play. I haven't been in contact with everybody is. Some people are worried about personnel costs, how much it's going to cost, is it worth the return on the investment? They're worried about not feeling like they could be experts in the field, but if it's a field that's just growing, this is an opportunity for us to become the experts, to write the book. Well, I mean, I'm already doing that, but that's something as an institution that we can really get on the ground floor of and get started. So I definitely think it's something we should be involved in. So it's something that's just growing. It's an opportunity. It's a great opportunity, and I think it's something that we should do. So if any of your institutions are involved with roots tourism, genealogy services, we definitely like to hear from what works, what doesn't. So thank you.
Thank you, Antje, for the presentation. And now, last but of course not least, we have Nonya Peters. As you know, she comes from the other side of the world, from Australia. Nice to have you again here.
Thank you.
And okay, we found it. So Nonya is giving us a talk about developing a sustainable model, a mutual cultural digital heritage, tools and cases. And I didn't mention that you work for the Curtin University Sustainability Policy Institute.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. And that was great because it's really about what I want to talk about. For many years I've been researching lots of migrant groups I started out with. Is that okay? Can you understand my English? Let me tell you about something. One of my colleagues sent me last week an article out of a newspaper that said that if you speak a dialect of a language, that you earn less money. So I am doubly disadvantaged. I speak Nederlands, Dutch, with a soft G, which is a provincial, and I speak Australian English. So that was bad. But I have been researching lots of different migrant groups from Europe for many years in Australia, from the post-war period. And my interest was every time, no? Too loud? Not loud enough? Every time I did interviews, as you all know, you get shown photographs and artifacts and all of that. And my concern then became, when they all started to want to start organizing museums, was how are we going to do that? How are we going to bring the records so that the average person can also see them? So I started to work, oops, how do I do this? Sideways? Yes. With other colleagues about this, and this is what basically I'm talking about today. The aims of it is to look at the whole issue from a digital perspective, but also work out how it would be possible to do it. And talking about the records, I'll show you in a minute, the biggest issue seems to be who's going to own it eventually. So you can bring this stuff together, but who's going to bring it? And a lot of the information on an institutional level is in an archive rather than in a museum, but it should be available to the public. And at the moment, we're still thinking about museums and archives, as we always have, which are usually begun on a monocultural basis. How are we going to fit all this mobility of people around the world into those institutions? Who should own it finally? And do we need to rethink how we do that? So I'm examining the archival, custodial and digital challenges that impact discovery, collection, preservation and content management of material and immaterial traces from the past. And I'm using the Netherlands as a test case simply because everyone's trying to do this, but we needed one to work on. And we have an international group working on it. And I thought this was a useful model, looking at what is, what could be, what might be, and what should be. So this is a fact. Global migration is one of the defining characteristics for the 20th and 21st century. Successive generations of migrants have left material, as we know, and immaterial traces. However, the documents and evidence of the history of migration, they're spread right over. So what we're trying to talk about is, should we be doing this on a homeland, hostland? So we bring two lots of data together because we leave our records behind us and we start new records off in the new area. And they're vital resources for research and also for family history, which has become so very, very important. And I think I don't need to show you, go through these. We know that it's a mutual heritage activity, immigration. You leave one country, you go to another, or you might go to 2 or 3 nowadays, as you do, but you leave traces behind you wherever you go, traces that are part of your heritage. So the types of traces that we leave behind are birth and death records, immigration records, shipping lists, passport, school and business cards. There's a whole series, menus, diaries. Here are some of the artifacts that I've been given on the way through. These are teeth pulled out in a Japanese prisoner of war camp to buy food. These are some of the documents that are given to me along the way. I've just gifted them all to the State Library. I'm lucky I could do that because not all the migrant groups are going to be taken on board. So what are we going to do with this information that these migrant groups are collecting avidly? I just wanted to let you see this because it's also Indigenous groups who claim heritage. And this is through the Dutch East India Company. I'm currently working with Aboriginals in Australia, with Africans in South Africa, in Namibia, and also in Indonesia, and they all claim Dutch heritage through the incursion of the Dutch East India Company in the 1600s into the Indian Ocean region. And they claim that heritage also for a functional reason, sometimes for land claims, because their children have been stolen by the government or something. There's a break in transmission of culture, and we're trying to fill that break with them and give them a platform on which to talk about who they think they are and and how helpful we'll be. And I'll be able to tell you more about that because our exhibition's open next year. That gives you a little bit of Australia in the middle. And these are the sort of portraits we're doing with portraits, oral histories. We're using ethnopoetics too to make points. It's a really good way to pick some dialogue out of a research interview and emphasize the bits that are important to the person, because you listen to the sound and then you emphasize. And the little girl there is one of our so-called Aboriginals, you see, and the other woman is from Africa who still wears the Dutch kappie from the trekboers. So these are, of course, all the things that I use my information for. Stories. My exhibition in the State Library has just finished, the one on journeys there. We have a 400-year relationship with the Netherlands at the moment through the discovery of, through shipwrecks mainly. And it's the shipwrecks that, and this is my mother's home, to show you a Dutch home in Australia. And it's a big one in the State Library. So we had 2 workshops, one in Sydney and one recently, just last month in Leiden. The Sydney one really showed us to what extent migrants were collecting and what should we do about that, and how should we why digital is important. And digital will give us accessibility, longevity, sustainability, and ongoing inclusion. But the big issue is responsibility. So I thought at the workshop we recently had, we had UNESCO there, and I thought, oh, UNESCO, you know, maybe we could give them a bit of a razz up. But, you know, despite that, it wasn't going to work. And these are the issues, of course, with online. You've got to look at ways that we're going to do that. We've got to have information that's interoperable. We've got to have really clear plans about sustainable legacy, and it's got to be coordinated. The longevity, we need government for that, but how are we going to do that? And our current position, what can be a digital template, is and how do we resolve those problems? And the workshop was very much looking at that and the research questions and how can we best negotiate the traces and records in digital forms and enable access to the dual interacting histories they represent, and how to develop standards and strategies for linking the diverse resources through digital methods, community governance, and sustainable practices. So we had the 2 workshops. We got a wealth of information about the main aim of the second one, which is a workshop which is competitive. You have to compete to get it. So we were very lucky, and it means we can actually have another one next year. And then I would suggest that maybe the people involved here from archives and GLAMS, that would be the next lot of people to come. The Lorenz was in response to that, because heritage can be both a research and a source for cultural engagement, especially in the construction of meaning and identity. New digital architectures and new digital preservation techniques and linked open data standards offer new possibilities for scholars and migrant alike and community members. So the core aims were how can dispersed and heterogeneous data or migrants be linked to form a coherent resource? What can you contribute? That was asking us to it. What should the other participants contribute? How can such a resource be made sustainable? Who owns it or who should own it? How about privacy and ethical issues involved? And how should they be best tackled? And how to make a data cloud consisting of diverse resources accessible and queryable. We're building knowledge societies. This was something that UNESCO wants. You can build them on the pillars of freedom of expression, universal access to information and knowledge, respect for cultural and linguistic diversity, and quality education for all. In that would also come the notion that we've got to provide some sort of language, like a Google Translate, which is much better than that is. But we do need. So my dream was the UNESCO one agency take it on, and of course they didn't. They made it very clear that that's not what UNESCO does. So that was the dream. And if you go back to my model, it's who, what is, what can be, what might be. Mine, what could be, was this one. The outcome of our workshop so far, how am I going for time? 3 minutes. Oh, okay. Oh, done all right. A major point is that what it was all about was about the shift from an individual working on something like that. And I had been for many years. I have a dark website, Dutch Australians at a Glance, and all of that sort of thing, was to see that this has really got to be not just even national, but international, between countries, taking it on as a soft diplomacy exercise or something to that effect. We need networks of trust and collaboration for designing. We had designers there as well, digital infrastructure in which everybody has to contribute, but can also profit from that. And we're now writing a white paper. In the meantime, we're working in Google Spaces, trying to work out the best way. And what came out of that workshop was how we go forward. So homeland, hostland, curation is a vital concept. A common digital interpretive research environment would facilitate closer cultural and social analysis for comparative research and to educate. This would widen the scope and range of the interpretive opportunities, foster international academic relationships and networks involving partner organizations and so on. But I wanted to just show you the archivist here, and I didn't organize this, and I tried to use it without it. But this is in fact the 2 countries. The back to Roots group also doing the same sort of thing that you're doing. And that really was something that I've stuck in my mind, you know, it was really important. So Destination Australia is important. Trove, have you seen Trove, the National Library of Australia website? You can do, they've digitized most newspapers. So anyone from with a migrant in Australia can already get maybe some information from Trove. Trove is a very sophisticated research engine, and I've certainly won a lot of prizes around the world with it. So Trove, Destination Australia. Destination Australia is a way that we can start linking Australian immigration across the board. And I just want to say to you that in Poland, the first ship from Africa came to Western Australia of those Poles who went through Siberia first. So you'll be interested in the stories there. But there's so much we can link just by listening, because the Latvians came and I researched those too. So, and Destin Australia is where you'll both find information on that, and the Danes. Thank you very much. And I'll leave you with that thought, because it can stay up a bit longer.
Thank you all for keeping time so close, and I hope you will agree that all the presentations gave a multi-perspective approach to the work of museums and research, and the questions of multi-perspectivity and audience involvement combined all of our presentations. So now it's time to start audience involvement. Please state your comments or ask your questions to us.
Thanks. It's working. It's working. Just to say, first of all, that was a very thought-provoking and stimulating panel. And I don't actually have questions, but what it did do was stimulate some thoughts. And I won't go on for too long, but I'd like to try and say what it stimulated, and it connects all of the presentations. Anybody who works in a migration institution, and that's what connects us all in the room, I think one of the questions often in one's head, and I suppose Freya's presentation kind of focused in on that, what is the question that always begins the conversation? And for me, it's 3 words: where is home? Because that simple 3 questions prompts and opens a door on the conversation, which is always about migration. And I think the other crucial thing is that it shows us the universality of migration. So not creating the migrant as the other, but connecting the empathy that we share in that we all leave, cross, and arrive. This is a common human experience. The other thing that was in my head, and I'm looking out, of course, at a pilgrim out in the square there, is a way of understanding roots tourism, and I interact with roots tourists in Mellon Centre for Migration Studies, is that it can be understood as a form of pilgrimage, and that what many of the visitors, roots tourists, really want is to visit the specific home place, be it a building or a field, and experience the frisson that they get, intensity of emotional connection with that specific space. So I hope with your colleagues that you can convince, and I think you've got a good job to try and do that. The third and final thought is, I think in the future, the stories, to come back to Freya's central idea of the people who visit the museum, become a part of the collection. So the stories that come from roots tourism and the genealogy and their individual migration stories feed into a very, very rich resource, probably as a digital resource, that actually enhances in a very important way. And finally, I think, and this is coming out of the session in San Sebastian back in July, we know that governments today are increasingly using diaspora as quite a crude, reductionist economic tool. The question is today, how do we enrich and make real the diasporic connections? And I think this roots tourism is one important dimension to that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like the Latvian government is trying to do a lot to bring in the diaspora. I mean, we even have a minister for diaspora questions and all that. But it was just like I mentioned, is that their only focus seems to be on the Latvian-speaking diaspora. And even then, it's most often just the people who have left in the past 10, 15 years. They have some focus on, I mean, Latvian-speaking repatriates, like those of us from Second World War generation families who grew up speaking Latvian, there's a tiny, tiny bit of focus on us, but most of it's on the recent migrants. And pretty much if you don't speak Latvian, they don't care about you at all. So that's what I'm hoping to change. So, because that's a much, much bigger, broader field with so many more people and so much more potential. And because that's something that government's always interested in, so much more money. So they shouldn't be ignoring it.
Okay, other questions or comments? Over there, please.
Thank you. I am Bram from the Red Star Line Museum in Antwerp. A little bit in the same direction of the previous comment, I would like to ask to Freya. So you were talking about these very inspiring co-creational projects where refugees could make their own exhibition with the stuff that they bring to the museum. Do you ask them, can we keep it? Is there a link between those projects and your collection policy?
Yes, we do. It's all a part of the law that we have to comply with. We do ask them if they want to leave their objects there, but it's not our main goal when we start these things. Sometimes we're lucky and they want to give us photographs and objects, but it's not our main thing.
And there was another question there, right there, yeah?
Yes, I'm a colleague of Bram, so also from the Red Star Line Museum, and I'm interested in the involvement of the audience, and I was thinking you do all these sorts of projects with refugees and other people with migration background, and how do the broader audience respond to these presentations? Because it's also something that we are trying to do in our museum. And we are now doing a project with refugees, youngsters who are coming to the museum, telling their story. We are searching with them, what will you tell? What part of your story will you tell, will you share? And it's a challenge to work with these people, but also make these projects are very powerful for these people, but how to make the connection with the broader audience that sometimes is not always interested in migration today?
I think that I can't speak for other countries, but at least in Denmark right now, the discussion has been so big and it's been so present in the whole political scene that people are interested to see what it is and who these people are and hear their stories. So we do see an interest. But mostly from schools, actually, that sort of take up these political themes and come visit us. I'd say we get a little bit more visits from people that don't have immigration backgrounds than we usually do, but what we get most of is immigrant groups now, more than we used to. Yeah.
Can I just say something? In the West Australian Museum, they now have a refugee boat. They managed to get, so in our new museum, that boat will go in it and with the stories of the people in that boat. And I think it's less confronting, but still the story will be there. It's also about the confrontation and how people are currently feeling generally about refugees. And in Australia, it's a very hot topic.
Yeah.
So it's really got to be provided in a very sensitive manner.
Yeah. I have a comment to that because we have next year a collaboration with the Danish National Museum that have been collecting artifacts and stories in Lesbos in Greece. And we have a boat actually, or a rubber dinghy coming in. And we discussed for a long time because we had ideas of maybe putting not dolls, but like to make it look like people were sitting in this boat. And we were like, can we really do that? And it's a little bit too sensitive. And then we asked some refugees and they were like, but that's how it happens. So don't be afraid to show that. These things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and you raised your hand. Yeah, please. Microphone there.
So once more, congratulations to the organizers and congratulations to everybody of this table. As you remember, one of the first point of this IME organization was established about the interest related with museums, and happily that we have this table and all your presentations. I congratulate once more Nonja, and I ask if Nonja remember that Portugal tried a virtual museum 16 years before. Nowadays is not really very active because he's died, the historian that was really very interested. But nevertheless, I suppose that these virtual museums has not the interaction now that they must be, and maybe IME can develop an effort to put in an interaction and to promote this interaction between them.
Thank you. Actually, in the new museum, because we're building a new museum for 40 or 50 million or something, there's a lot of a debate about how things should be put in, because we have now a clean slate, basically. Yeah, and it is no longer thinking we've got to separate the immigration, we've got to write the story through the whole story. Is going to be how it's presented as part of the everyday life of Western Australia. So rather than separate it out, although there would be the boat, but it'll be part you walk through as the people who make up the community. So it's very, very sensitive, and we need to find ways to do that. And I noticed that lately that's more palatable to the general public. So you can still get it in there, but you have to find a way to do it in a way that it's very acceptable. Then they'll think.
Okay, I can't see any other questions, so that's perfect because we are keeping time. You're all keen on lunch as me, but you have the chance to speak to all of the speakers at lunch and for the final questions. So thank you for your being so kind as to come to us to share us, and I hopefully that will be a format we can keep. And I think the next session starts at 1 hour from now. So have a nice break.
Wait a moment. Sorry. Wait a moment. When we finish the lunch, go out to the square to take a photo by the IME group, okay? Thank you.